There has been much fanfare and, let's say, debate, discussion about OpenAI Strawberry, which dropped yesterday, at least to some users. Now, if you're just a normal ChatGPT user, there have already been some people with access to Strawberry. Fortunately, if you watched my live stream yesterday, you saw that I was using it via the API, which has a little bit more unbounded constraints. In other words, you can use it more and it doesn't time out as fast. Now, at a very, very high level, how does Strawberry work? Strawberry works, it's actually simpler than I thought that it was in the video that I made a couple weeks ago about how does Strawberry work. It is basically just chain of thought. Now, the benefit of this, the reason that this is an innovation is because they fine-tuned chain of thought into the model. Now, I'm going to talk about how we have been bootstrapping one model off of the next and how this will figure into the training of GPT-5 or GPT-6 or whatever. So we'll get to that. But first, I just want to show you what it's actually doing. So in the example that OpenAI published, they gave it this, it looks like ROT13 maybe, or maybe some kind of cipher. Anyways, so they gave it an example and they say, use the example above to decode this. So they said, think step by step, and then they did this. And so what it does is it starts going through and thinking about, okay, what are the problems? How do we decode this? Yada, 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 yada. So it's thinking to itself. So basically what I wrote on Twitter, and people seem to agree with this, and I'm, by the way, I'm not the only person who wrote this, is basically what OpenAI has done is they have switched from single shot inference to basically self-prompting or meta-prompting. So it's going to talk through the whole thing in one go, but rather than just question answer the way that ChatGPT and language models have worked now, it's going to spend a little bit more time thinking about things. Now, if you have watched Claude 3.5 Opus already does this to a lesser extent, but it will think through problems this way. I made a post a while ago on Substack that was a little bit controversial, and I think I mentioned it in a video as well, where Claude does seem to have some level of System 2 thinking. Now, this is also nothing new. Microsoft was demonstrating this cyclical kind of iterative self-prompting a while ago. Now, in this case, you can see that it keeps talking for quite a long time. This is a much longer output than what it has done before. So, in that respect, it is an innovation. It's not that difficult to fine-tune a model to do this. And in fact, I have right here, there are actually several open source data sets. There's chain of thought data sets, graph of thought data sets, and tree of thought data sets. So this is nothing new. So OpenAI they're basically kind of the first to market maybe, or at least the first big shop to market. There's actually plenty of people that responded during the live stream from smaller startups that have brought this stuff to market already. So OpenAI has first mover advantage, which all that's fine. So I wrote a Substack article this morning saying the strawberry juice is not worth the squeeze. I talked about how it's basically just chain of thought. The first chain of thought paper came out in January 2022, so over 2.5 years ago. Basically, this is approximating a very simplistic cognitive architecture. And it still fails at some simple tasks. We had a lot of fun testing it and stress testing it yesterday. Now, one thing that I'll point out, though, is that GPT-4o Mini, which is the current model that does everything, is 15 cents per million tokens, and the O1 Preview is $15 per million tokens. So it's literally 100 times more expensive for a relatively minor improvement in performance, because there are still plenty of tests that these other models can do. Now, with that being said, we'll see how it performs on the benchmarks, which is probably an improvement. And what I'll say is that because of the cost, so let's look at it from a business perspective. From a technical perspective, this is very interesting. From a business perspective, it's not very interesting at all, because OpenAI did not have product market fit, or they barely had product market fit, but they don't really yet have price market fit. They're still unprofitable. And so now this model is 100 times more expensive for maybe 10 to 20% better performance on some tasks. It does unlock some new capabilities, which is interesting, but is it worth 100x the cost? Probably not. And so then you say, well, where do we go from here? Where I would go, if my money is more on multi-agent frameworks, because basically what you're doing here is what multi-agent frameworks have already been able to do with cheaper, faster models. So I will wait. I'm not going to hold my breath, but I suspect that multi-agent frameworks will be able to get similar or superior performance that are also cheaper and faster. So we'll see. But another thing is, I wasn't actually going to make this video until I wrote this comment. I was being kind of snarky here on Twitter. I said, new business model just dropped. Do Strawberry, but with multi-agent framework. Use model routing. Achieve results faster and cheaper. Do it all with LangChain. You could literally do this with LangChain, by the way. And then present customers with an API so it's no different from Strawberry. And Carlos is a hilarious guy. So he says, LangChain? I say, that's all you need to replicate Strawberry. He says, true, I just don't like the framework. I said, I don't either, which is why Strawberry is hilarious. He says, to be fair, there's a flywheel here where System 2 informs System 1 fine-tuning. I said, yes, I agree with that, but it's not nearly the breakthrough that fanboys are claiming it is. We bootstrapped instruct-aligned models with vanilla GPT-3, then bootstrapped chatbots with those instruct-aligned models, and now chatbots are bootstrapping reasoning. So this is what I want to talk about. I wasn't going to make this video until I saw that someone else gets it. And maybe some other people are inferring this or implying this, but nobody said it as clearly as Carlos and I did here. And if somebody else did say it somewhere else, I apologize. I'm not trying to say we're the first to figure it out. But okay, so take a big step back. People generally agree that what OpenAI has done is gotten the first inclinations of System 2 thinking. It's not really cyclical, and there's no supervisor layer. It's just self-talk. So you might say that's better or worse. It remains to be seen. But what happens is, as more people use this, they get more data. So there's this concept in technology called the data flywheel. And what I'm talking about here is if you go way back and use plain vanilla GPT-3, it was a really dumb autocomplete engine. It was almost unusable. It was very difficult to use. And in fact, if you look at the prompts that we had to do, the prompts were very, very narrowly constrained. However, what we found was that using GPT-3, we would basically create instructions. Follow these instructions, do this task based on the input that you're given. Here's some placeholder values. So what OpenAI did was they said, okay, clearly this is the best way to use this technology, so let's fine-tune it to then follow instructions. So then they became much easier to use. That's when we got to the Text DaVinci 01 and 02 series of models. And so then these models, they could follow based on the bootstrapped data from the way that people were originally using GPT-3. They were able to say, okay, now it can follow a simple instruction. And from that, and here, let me just show you some of the prompts, because I was bringing up this yesterday. So here's one of my original GPT-3 prompts. So I had to give it all the context. I am Raven and AGI. The following are high stakes topics for me to look out for with the scenarios, yada, yada, yada. This was one prompt. This was one safety prompt that was a component of my cognitive architecture. And here what I had to do is I had to give it an example of scenarios and evaluations. And so it basically just auto-completed. It recognized the pattern of saying scenario 1, evaluation, scenario 2, evaluation, scenario 3, and then I give it a scenario, and then it produces an evaluation, and then I had to manually put in the end token. So this is where we started. Now you can imagine that with just if you had to write prompts like this to get even ChatGPT to work, it's not usable. And we also, by the way, we only had like 2,000 tokens for the window back then. So this was like half of the token window. Now we have 100,000 and 1 million token windows. Okay, so you start with this, and then you bootstrapped an instruct series. So an instruct series, let me see if I can find an instruct series. Let's see. This one was probably based on instruct. Output. Yes, so this one, the prompts were way easier. So you see the prompt is much, much shorter. So this is still GPT-3 era, but this was a model that was instruct aligned, so you didn't have to just have plain vanilla whatever. And so I just say, here's the recent conversation, here's the thoughts, and then give a reply. So much, much easier to use, still not nearly as intuitive as ChatGPT. The first ChatGPT was trained on these kinds of models. And by the way, let me show you an example of what I was working on around that time. So let's see. I was basically working on ChatGPT 6 months before they launched ChatGPT. So that was called my Information Companion chatbot. So this was May 8th, 2022. So May, June, July, August, September, October, November. So 6-ish months before ChatGPT launched. And so what I had to do is I had to use those instruct-aligned series models to synthesize. Here, let me find a better example. These are too short. There we go. So I had to synthesize fake chat data. And so by synthesizing fake chat data with an instruct-aligned model, I was able to then say, okay, here's a chatbot. So I was able to train chatbots. And this is exactly how OpenAI approached ChatGPT. You synthesize a bunch of chat data, and then you launch a chatbot, and then you get real-world chat data from your real users, and you use that to improve the underlying model. That is how they got from GPT-3 to 3.5 to 4, and then ultimately to 4 Turbo. Now, 4 Turbo is based on other underlying improvements like quantization, and maybe distillation. I don't really know. Anyways, so that is the flywheel. So then we got from plain vanilla to instruct to chat. Now we're getting from chat to reasoning. And of course, we already have some open source data sets. We already see some of this other stuff. So with all that being said, Carlos says it's not much of a moat. This has been true all along. The open source community is able to reverse engineer anything that OpenAI does within a few months, and that time window is shortening. So what's going to happen next? First, people are going to look at this and say, oh, OpenAI just proved that you can bootstrap reasoning with a chatbot model. Everyone has chatbot models. There's open source chatbot models. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to basically do the same thing that we did here, which is synthesize reasoning data sets. So you synthesize a whole bunch of reasoning data sets, make it open source or closed source or whatever, it doesn't matter. Everyone's going to figure out how to synthesize these data sets, which, by the way, there are already tree of thought data sets, chain of thought data sets, and graph of thought data sets. So now it's just got to be commercialized. So that's going to be the next phase as we improve this technology. Now you might say, this is super impressive. And my personal reaction is it's not very impressive because we've been working on this for years. This is literally just one small incremental step on the path. It's not nearly as sophisticated as I had hoped, which is why I'm just unequivocally saying we don't have AGI right now. We basically have a model that was fine-tuned to meta prompt or self-prompt. And you might say, that's still cool. And yes, it is cool. But we saw this coming. And it's not as sophisticated as it could have been. Now, as Carlos accurately says, though, this is the flywheel. And so what he's referring to here is Daniel Kahneman's works on System 1 and System 2 thinking. So if you're not familiar with this, System 1 thinking is basically intuitive, knee-jerk, off-the-cuff, I ask you a question, you just spit out an answer without thinking about it. System 2 thinking in humans is when you think about something for a while, you've got your little cognitive loop going, and then you say, okay, well, what about this? What about that? Okay. And then you spit out an answer. What Daniel Kahneman and others pointed out is that when you engage in System 2 thinking, over time, your brain learns to approximate that behavior, and it becomes more and more automatic. For instance, if you're a programmer, when you first start programming, you're engaged with a lot of Systems 2 thinking, which is very, very cognitively demanding, and it's very exhausting, and it's very slow. However, once you're an experienced programmer, and by the way, this applies to literally all professions. All professions work this way. Speaking in front of a camera, what I'm doing right now, I'm not having to think about what I'm going to say. I'm just talking. I am doing a single prompt, a zero-shot inference right now as I'm talking to the camera. I didn't have to plan any of this. And so my pitch to you right now, what I'm talking about, has been integrated into System 1 thinking because I've done it for literally thousands of hours. So what Carlos is implying here is that while this data is very expensive right now, I point out that over here that the cost is probably not going to be worth it for most people. However, I suspect that OpenAI is launching this not because they want the product yet, but because they need more data. They want better data. And so what happens is everyone is using this model now, right? So, if you're using it on the free version or a paid version or whatever, OpenAI, if depending on the settings that you use, they're going to be consuming some of that data. So in every case where it succeeds, they're going to mark that as saying, hey, this was a good sample. And in every case where it doesn't, they're going to say that was a bad sample. They probably have other ways of filtering out the data set in the background. And so as they accumulate more and more chain of thought or graph of thought or tree of thought reasoning, their underlying models are going to get better and better as they have more and more data to train it. This is why first mover advantage has been so powerful for OpenAI, is because they have the biggest user base, which means they have the best, the most data, and more data is everything right now. So this is going to help them bootstrap a better reasoning model, which will help them eventually bootstrap whatever comes next. We're not really sure what comes next, at least not right now. So I'm not particularly impressed because, again, this is nothing new. You can synthesize the same data with just LangChain and self-prompting and multi-agent frameworks, which that's kind of cool. But this is not a fundamental paradigm shift over everything that we have seen, going all the way back to bootstrapping, instruct-aligned models with plain vanilla GPT-3 and then bootstrapping chatbots with that. This is just one thing building on top of the next. Now, where I'll end is I had some of my patrons, some of my supporters were saying, oh, hey, Dave, is this sign that we're about to have an intelligence explosion or intelligence takeoff? No. And here's the thing. Here's the paradigm shifts that I'm looking at. The underlying transformer technology, that's one thing. So the transformers are bigger, they have larger context windows and better attention mechanisms. That is an algorithmic improvement. The rest of this is all just data improvement. So it's there's two fundamental components that go into these models. There's the algorithm, which is you initialize a model with, you've got the layers and you've got the weights and everything. That's one thing. And then the data that you use to train it and the techniques that you use to fine tune it. So I guess there's technically 3 steps, but it's data and algorithm, or model and data. And so when you look at the paradigm shifts from GPT-2 to GPT-3, that was mostly a model improvement. They both, right out of the box, GPT-2, autocomplete engine. GPT-3, also an autocomplete engine. They did have fine tuning capability with GPT-2, but it was very primitive compared to today. GPT-3 to GPT-4, the underlying technology is still fundamentally the same. The only new paradigm is the fine tuning. Even the initial data is probably more or less the same. As people have pointed out, we've run out of data. So now it's all synthetic data. But what I'm showing you here on the screen, this is a piece of synthetic data that I generated with GPT back in the day. We've known that synthetic data was coming. And in this respect, though, as Strawberry is integrated with the ChatGPT API and OpenAI's platform API, they're going to get even more data. And then all you have to do is separate the wheat from the chaff, and you've got a better data set that you can then bootstrap new capabilities in. Okay, I'm repeating myself. Let me know if you understand this. I think I explained it clearly enough. But yeah, this is the process. Where I'll end is saying the time between these new bootstrapping processes is getting much, much wider. From GPT-3 to Instruct was 3 to 6 months, maybe 9 to 12 months maximum. And then from Instruct to Chat was also less than a year. But then from Chat to this has been more than 2 years. And so it's getting harder and harder to bootstrap these new techniques. And I suspect that will continue. So I'm going to double down and say that, yes, the investment is there, but AI progress is still slowing down. Now, the UX is getting better, the usability is getting better, but the underlying science is not accelerating. I'm not seeing any evidence that the underlying science is accelerating. With that being said, the underlying science does not need to accelerate for deployment to accelerate. So what I suspect we're going to see over the next couple of years is more deployment acceleration, which you might say functionally it doesn't matter. But when I say AI is slowing down, I typically am referring to the underlying science, not the actual commercial deployment. Commercial deployment, I will absolutely concede that is likely accelerating. And Strawberry, as an improved UX, Strawberry could be the difference between instruct aligned GPT-3 and ChatGPT. ChatGPT was a big wake up moment. I don't think it's going to be as big of a jump because the chat interface is so intuitive. This is going to be an incremental improvement on the chat interface. All right, I'm repeating myself. You get the idea. Thanks for watching. Cheers.